Clara Whitfield did not cry when they laughed at her. She had learned long ago that tears only gave cruel people something to celebrate. She stood in the middle of Red Valley's Main Street, her best Sunday dress dusty from the road, her suitcase sitting in the dirt beside her feet, and she lifted her chin while 3 different ranchers turned their backs on her in less than an hour. She was 25 years old, strong, capable, and completely alone, and not a single man in that town believed she was worth a second glance. If this story already has your heart, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end, and drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Clara Whitfield walked into Red Valley. She made herself one promise. She would not cry. Not in front of them. Not where they could see it and feel satisfied. She had made that same promise in 4 other towns before this one, and she had kept it every single time. She intended to keep it here too. Gerald Drummond looked her over for 3 seconds front to back, the way a man looked at a horse he already knew he wasn't going to buy, and said, "I need someone who can move fast, Miss Whitfield. No offense." "No. None taken," Clara said, because she had learned that saying none taken was faster than explaining what she actually felt, and faster was better when the door was already closing. She walked out of the Drummond ranch, and she kept her shoulders straight, and she did not look back. The Harker property was a mile further down the road. The foreman met her at the gate, a young man with sunburned ears and the expression of someone who had been told what to say and was determined to say it as quickly as possible. "Mrs. Harker has specific preferences," he said, "about who works in the household. I'm real sorry, ma'am." "Is she home?" Clara asked. "I'd like to speak with her directly." He blinked. Nobody had apparently asked him that before. She said. "It's all right," Clara said. "Thank you for your time." She picked up her suitcase and walked back to the main road. That was twice before 10 o'clock in the morning. She stopped at the edge of the road and set down her suitcase and stood in the heat for a moment, not thinking about anything specific, just breathing. The plains stretched out around Red Valley in every direction, flat and gold and enormous, and the sky above them was the kind of blue that made a person feel small in a way that had nothing to do with cruelty. Just scale. Just the plain fact of how big the world was, and how much of it didn't know or care that she existed. She picked up the suitcase and kept walking. The men outside the feed store noticed her before she reached the boardwalk. "That the Whitfield woman," one of them said. He said it at a volume that suggested he didn't particularly care whether she heard. "That's her," another one said. "Been making rounds all morning." Drummond turned her away. "Harker, too." "Somebody ought to tell her." A pause, weighted and deliberate. "No cowboy's gonna hire a woman who can't even fit in a saddle." Laughter, the kind that had teeth. Clara walked past them without turning her head. She was very good at this, the forward-looking, the controlled breathing, the art of making her face do exactly nothing. She had been practicing since she was 12 years old, and she was very nearly excellent at it now. What she was not excellent at was making her hands stop shaking. So she gripped the handle of her suitcase until her knuckles went white, and she walked, and she did not give them her tears, because her tears were hers, and nobody in that town had done a single thing to deserve them. There was a third ranch. Coal land out beyond the northern hills, 3 miles up a road that curved through tall grass. She had $43 a letter of reference from a minister, and no plan beyond that road. She started walking. She was halfway up the first hill when she heard hooves behind her. She moved to the side without looking back. She expected the rider to pass. The hooves slowed instead. She looked up. The man on the horse was somewhere close to 40 broad through the shoulders, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw built for hard weather. He wore a plain working shirt worn through at the elbows and a hat that had lived a full life before today. His eyes found her face and stayed there, dark and still, and paying attention in a way most people didn't bother with. He looked at her suitcase. He looked at the road ahead of her. He looked at her face again. "You're headed to my place," he said. "If you're Nathan Cole," Clara said, "then yes, I have references. Drummond's wife sent word this morning." A pause. "Said you make excellent biscuits." Mrs. Drummond wasn't present at the interview. Gerald Drummond talks loud enough his wife hears everything through two closed doors. He looked at her suitcase again. That's heavy. I'm managing. I can see that. He swung down from the horse without hurrying about. It reached for her suitcase before she could object and tied it to his saddle. Walk or ride, it's 3 more miles. Clara looked at him. She waited for it, that flicker, that small recalibration behind the eyes, when a man looked at her and decided what her body meant about who she was. She had seen it 10,000 times. She knew exactly what it looked like. It didn't come. I don't need charity, Mr. Cole. It ain't charity. It's 3 miles in midday heat, and I need you functional when we arrive. I got questions. He nodded toward the horse. Her name's Delia. She's 15 years old and she moves like a church hymn. Delia looked back at Clara with the ancient calm of a horse who had seen everything and found none of it particularly alarming. All right, Clara said. She got up on Delia with less grace than she would have preferred. Nathan Cole walked beside the rest of the way to the ranch, without comment, without looking at her sideways, without doing any of the things people usually did when they were trying to decide what to make of her. He just walked, steady and quiet like a man comfortable in his own skin and not interested in performing otherwise. Clara, who had spent her entire life surrounded by people who were always performing something, found this unusual enough to notice. The position is housekeeping and cooking, Nathan said, standing in his kitchen with his hat in his hands. Meals for myself and 2 or 3 ranch hands. Garden if you're willing. Fair pay on time every week. You'd have the back room and meals included. Clara looked at the kitchen. Scarred table, clean but marked by years. 2 windows with no curtains. The garden outside had gone half to weeds, but the bones of it were good, the rows still straight under the neglect, the soil still dark. Someone had cared about this place once. The caring had stopped, and the place remembered it. And what happened to your last housekeeper? She asked. Married the blacksmith, moved to Denver, 8 months ago. You've been managing alone since then. Surviving alone, he said. It's different. Clara looked at him. I can see that, she said. He didn't flinch at that. He didn't try to explain himself or soften the word. He just let it stand there true and undefended the way an honest man left honest things. I don't need someone who looks a particular way, he said. I need someone who knows their work and isn't going to be frightened off by hard weather or long hours. If that's you, the position is yours. She waited for the other thing. The qualification. The circling back. The way people always found a way to return to what they considered the central issue, which was somehow always her body and never her abilities. Nathan Cole looked at her and waited. That's me, she said. Then you're hired. He put his hat on and walked out to see to his horse. Simple as breathing. Clara stood alone in the kitchen and felt the particular relief of a door that opens instead of closes. She didn't move for a moment. She just stood there and let herself feel it, because she had learned not to rush past relief when it arrived, since it didn't always come when you needed it, and you had to receive it properly when it did. Then she tied on her apron and went to work. By the next morning, she had learned the house, and by the end of the week, she had learned the land. The ranch hands came in for breakfast at 6. Holt, who was somewhere past 60, and communicated through nods and the angle of his hat, and Birch, who was 20, and communicated through everything all at once. When Clara set the biscuits on the table that first morning, Birch stared at her for a startled half-second, and then decided with the visible determination of a young man choosing his manners to act as though everything was completely normal. Holt reached for a biscuit without looking up from his coffee. Lord, Birch said after his first bite. Holt reached for a second one. Nathan looked up from a letter he was reading, took one bite, and looked back at his letter. But he stopped reading for a moment, and Clara, who was already learning to watch for the things Nathan Cole did, instead of talking, counted that as something. The trouble began. The way trouble in small towns always did not. Loud, not sudden, but patient and persistent, the way water worked at a crack. It was Mrs. Drummond who gave it its first voice. By Thursday of Clara's first week, Birch came home from the general store with the expression of a young man who knew something he wished he didn't. "You can tell me," Clara said. She was at the kitchen table, both hands in bread dough. "I've heard most things already." Birch pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. "Mrs. Drummond's been talking." "About me?" "About Mr. Cole's, about his judgment in hiring." He stared at the table. "She said a man of his standing ought to be more careful about the impression he makes. She said—" He stopped. "She said a woman of my size reflects poorly on the household," Clara said. Birch looked up. "Yeah. And what did the people listening say?" He didn't answer, which was its own answer. Clara kept working the dough. Her hands didn't slow. But something deep in her chest did what it always did when the words came, that involuntary tightening, that old ache that 25 years had worn smooth but never fully erased. Like a healed bone that still knew where it had been broken. "It ain't right," Birch said fiercely. "No," she agreed. "It ain't. You want me to say something next time I'm in town, I could—" "No." She said it gently but clearly. "Thank you, Birch, but I fight my own battles." He nodded, unhappy but respecting it. After a moment he said, "Those biscuits this morning were the best thing I've eaten in 2 years." "I know," Clara said. He laughed, surprised, and the tension in the kitchen broke open like a window, letting air through, and she was glad of it. 3 days later, Nathan came to lean on the garden fence while she was pulling weeds. He stood there in the late afternoon quiet, watching the horizon, the way he watched most things, like he was looking for information in it. "Town's talking," he said. "Town's always talking. About you specifically." Clara sat back on her heels in the garden dirt. "I'm aware." I was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the tall grass beyond the fence. Somewhere behind them, Holt was hammering something in the direction of the barn. "I don't much listen to what this town says," Nathan said. "Just so you know." Clara looked up at him. He was watching the horizon, still not looking at her, and she understood that this was how he said things that mattered, sideways, without ceremony, like he was setting something down rather than presenting it. "It matters that you said it," she told him. He nodded once and pushed off the fence and walked back toward the barn. Clara stayed in the garden dirt for a moment, hands in the soil, looking at nothing in particular. She had worked for 6 different households over 2 years. Not one of them had said anything close to that. She went back to the weeds. She noticed the Fridays by accident. It was the second week when she first saw him prepare to leave in the early afternoon on a workday unusual enough to register. He came through the house in his good shirt, which he did not typically wear on weekdays, took something wrapped in cloth from the kitchen shelf, and left without explanation. He came back 2 hours later carrying a small bunch of wildflowers wrapped in damp cloth. I went directly to the back room, the one beside the main bedroom door. Always shut, the one she had understood without being told was not her room to enter. He was inside perhaps 10 minutes. When he came out, his face was quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. Not peaceful. Emptied. Like a vessel someone had poured something heavy out of. He didn't explain. He didn't look at her. He put his hat on and went to see to Delia, as though the afternoon were entirely ordinary. Clara left coffee on the table. When he came in and found it, he stood looking at it for a moment. "You don't have to do that," he said. "Coffee's no trouble," she said. He sat down. He wrapped both hands around the cup. He looked at the table. "Thank you," he said, quiet. "You're welcome," she said the same way. She went back to the stove and let him have the silence he needed. She did not ask. She understood, in the way that people who have carried long grief recognize the weight of it in others, that some things needed to be given room before they could be given words. The following Friday, he came back with flowers again. The Friday after that, the same. She always had the coffee ready. He always said thank you. It became its own small language between them. A set of words that meant more than they said, the way the most important conversations usually did. It was Holt who finally told her. Thursday evening, the two of them on the porch in the last light, the kind of quiet that existed between people who had stopped needing to fill silence with noise. "He goes every Friday," Holt said. Clara waited. "Cemetery between here and town." Little rise off the eastern road. He took a slow drink of his coffee. His wife's buried there. Mary Cole. Passed 3 years ago November. Fever took her in a week. A pause. He planted flowers at this grave in spring, so there'd always be something fresh. Winter killed them. So now he brings them himself. Clara looked out at the darkening plain. The back room, she said. Her room. Holt turned his cup in his hands. He keeps it exactly the way she left it. Ain't moved a single thing in 3 years. The wind came across the grass in a long, slow wave. Above the hills, the first stars were beginning to show. How was different before? Holt said, not looking at her. Not a different man, same man. But he laughed more, talked more. A long pause. She had a way of pulling things out of him. Took him a long time to learn how to be himself without her there doing that. Clara thought about what it cost to carry something that long. 3 years of Friday flowers. 3 years of that emptied face coming back through the door. He's a good man, Holt said. I know, she said. She meant it without qualification, which was not how she said most things about most people. She had learned to measure her words carefully, to not hand them out before they were earned. Nathan Cole had earned that one. The real trouble arrived on a Saturday evening. Clara had ridden into town on Delia for a supply-run flour salt lamp oil, a length of wire for Holt's fence repair. She had done it twice before, without more than the usual stares and the usual silence that fell over conversations when she walked into a room. That evening, Dora Alcott was at the counter of the general store. Dora Alcott was 22 years old and the daughter of the wealthiest rancher in the county, and she wore both facts the way some women wore perfume everywhere all the time, impossible not to notice. She was beautiful, and she knew it with the deep settled confidence of someone who had been told so reliably since birth. She had, as Clara had heard from Birch, expressed opinions about Nathan Cole's household choices on 2 separate public occasions. She was with 2 friends when Clara came in. She watched Clara move through the store with the particular attention of a woman deciding whether something was worth her time. She decided it was. You're the one working out at Cole's place, she said. I work for Mr. Cole, yes. Clara gave her name to the man behind the counter. Dora turned back to her friends, but her voice carried perfectly, and she knew it. I never could understand it. A man with Nathan Cole's name and land, and this is what he... She paused, let her eyes move across Clara briefly, completely dismissively. Settles for. One of her friends laughed behind her hand. The man behind the counter found something urgent to do with the flour sack. Clara felt the heat rise in the back of her neck, that familiar burning that was part fury, part something older and quieter and sadder than fury. She had felt it so many times that her body knew exactly what to do with it. Her voice came out steady. Whatever Mr. Cole settled for, she said, apparently cooks better than anyone in the county. He seems satisfied. Dora's eyes sharpened. For now, she said sweetly. Men always come to their senses eventually. I suppose they do, Clara said. Some sooner than others. She collected her order and walked out. 3 steps down the boardwalk, she stopped. She stood in the late afternoon heat and breathed. Just breathed in and out, slow and deliberate, and let the shaking in her hands move through her and settle. Then she untied Delia from the post, loaded the supplies, and rode back to the ranch. She did not tell Nathan. She put the supplies away. She started dinner. By the time the men came in, the kitchen smelled like roasting chicken and fresh cornbread, and she had herself put back together entirely, which was a thing she had become very efficient at over 25 years of practice. She had underestimated Birch. The next morning at breakfast, Nathan looked at her across his coffee and said, "There was trouble at the general store." Clara set down the coffee pot. "Birch." "Birch," he confirmed. "He means well." "He does." Nathan looked at her steadily. "What happened?" "Miss Alcott had opinions. She generally does." "About you. About your judgment." Clara met his eyes. "I handled it." "What did you say?" She allowed herself a small smile. "I told her that whatever I am, I cook better than anyone in the county, and my employer seemed satisfied. Something moved across Nathan Cole's face, not quite a smile, but near enough to one that she felt it. "That's accurate," he said. "I know it is." He looked at his coffee. He was quiet long enough that she thought the conversation was finished. Then he said without looking up, "Dora Alcott has been trying to get my attention for 2 years." Clara waited. "I've been consistently uninterested," he said, in case that needed saying. She looked at him. He was still looking at his coffee, turning the cup slowly in his hands, and she understood that this was another one of those things he was setting down, rather than presenting another sideways remark that was really a direct one if you knew how to read him. She was beginning to know how to read him. "It didn't need saying," she said, "but I appreciate it." He nodded and went back to his coffee, and Holt reached for a third biscuit, and Birch asked hopefully about the leftover potatoes from dinner, and the morning continued. But something in the air of the kitchen was different, and Clara thought that both of them noticed it, and that neither of them was quite ready to name it yet, which was probably exactly right. The fourth Friday. Nathan came back later than usual, the sun already low, the light coming in golden and sideways through the kitchen windows. Clara had kept the coffee warm. She was at the stove when she heard him come through the door, and she heard him stop. "Clara." She turned. He stood in the kitchen doorway with a bunch of wildflowers in his hand, larger than usual, prairie clover and wild phlox, and something soft and purple she had never learned the name of. He was looking at them rather than at her. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You don't owe me anything. Holt told me he told you." He looked up. His eyes were direct and a little tired and entirely honest. "I'd rather explain it myself. I don't want it sitting between us like something neither of us is allowed to touch." Clara turned fully from the stove and waited. "Her name was Mary," he said. "She died 3 years ago in November. Fever came on a Monday, and she was gone by Saturday, and I was not prepared for how fast it happened." He paused. He looked at the flowers in his hands. "She liked wildflowers, said they worked for their right to exist. I planted some at her grave in spring, but the winter killed them, so I bring them now." He was quiet a moment. "Fridays were our day. We always rode out together on Fridays. I couldn't stop going after she was gone. It felt like if I stopped, I was saying it was over, and I wasn't ready to say that." He stopped speaking. Clara looked at him, at the flowers in his rough hands, at the set of his jaw, at the particular way grief made a person look like they were standing very still in the middle of something that was still moving. "I read aloud every evening because of my father," she said. He looked up. "After he died, I kept reading aloud to myself for a year, just to fill the same space, just because stopping felt like losing him twice." She paused. "Some things we do aren't about logic. They're about keeping a promise to someone who isn't there to receive it anymore. There's nothing weak about that. It's just how love sits in a person sometimes, in the shape of what they used to do." Nathan Cole stood in the doorway of his kitchen with wildflowers in his hand and looked at her with an expression she had no word for, yet something between recognition and surprise and relief. The expression of someone who expected to carry a thing alone and found unexpectedly that another person already understood its weight. "She would have liked you," he said. The words landed with the full weight of what they were, which was not a small thing, not a casual thing, not the kind of thing this man said lightly. "I think I would have liked her," Clara said. He nodded. He went to take the flowers to town, and Clara went back to the stove, and the evening meal came out well, and Holt nodded at his plate the way he always did. But as she stood at that stove stirring something that didn't need stirring, Clara Whitfield thought about two people standing on opposite sides of a long grief, and how sometimes, not always, but sometimes the only way through was finding someone who had been standing in a different darkness, long enough that they recognized yours when they saw it. She thought about Nathan Cole's face in the kitchen doorway, the flowers in his hands, the way he'd said she would have liked you like a door opening rather than a door closing. She pressed her lips together and stared at the pot. She was not going to let herself feel it yet. It was too new, and she was too careful, and there were too many ways things like this didn't work out for women like her. But it was there, small and stubborn and persistent. The way the best things always started. The town of Red Valley had a long memory and a short tolerance for anything it didn't understand, and what it didn't understand, what it had never understood, was Nathan Cole. He had lived on the edge of that town for 11 years, and he had never once made himself easy to read. He paid his debts on time and kept his land in order and showed up when a neighbor needed help. But he did not attend socials, did not court the daughters of other ranchers, did not sit on the church council or the town board, or any of the committees that men like Gerald Drummond used to remind each other of their importance. He was polite, and he was distant, and he was, as far as Red Valley could tell, entirely self-contained in a way that made people uncomfortable, because a self-contained man gave a town nothing to work with, and a town without material was a town without purpose. For 3 years after Mary died, they had mostly left him alone. Grief was the one condition Red Valley was willing to respect, because grief was familiar, and grief had rules, and everybody knew what to do with it eventually. But eventually was starting to feel like it had arrived. And Nathan Cole, at 38, with good land and a solid name, was starting to look less like a widower and more like a choice, and Red Valley had opinions about that choice that it was increasingly unwilling to keep to itself. Clara learned all of this in her 5th week, not from one conversation, but from the accumulation of a dozen small ones. The way you learned weather by watching the sky over time, rather than reading a single cloud. Birch was her primary source, not because he gossiped. He didn't, or he didn't intend to, but because he had not yet learned to separate what he was thinking from what came out of his mouth, and Clara had learned to pay attention to the gap between the two. "Mrs. Drummond's having a dinner," he said one morning, setting his coffee cup down with the careful precision of someone managing a piece of information he wasn't sure how to put down. "Next Saturday, she invited Mr. Cole." Clara turned from the stove. "Did she?" "Yes, ma'am. And—" he looked at his cup. "Dora Alcott's going to be there." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. "Is that so?" Clara said. She specifically asked if Mr. Cole was coming before she confirmed her own attendance. Her father told Gerald Drummond that, and Gerald Drummond told his wife and his wife. "Told the whole town," Clara finished. "Pretty much." Birch finally looked up. "I thought you should know, that's all." "Thank you, Birch." She went back to the stove and kept her face entirely composed and her hands entirely steady, and she absolutely did not let herself feel anything about it, because she had no right to feel anything about it, and she knew it, and feeling things you had no right to was one of the fastest ways a person got hurt in this life. She was Nathan Cole's housekeeper. She had been here 5 weeks. She cooked his meals and tended his garden and left coffee on the table on Friday afternoons. That was the entire length and width of what she was to him. She told herself that very clearly 3 times in a row, and then she made the breakfast and fed the men and went out to the garden and pulled weeds until her hands stopped doing that involuntary thing they'd started doing the moment Birch said Dora Alcott's going to be there. Nathan Cole said nothing about Mrs. Drummond's dinner until Wednesday evening. He came in from the fields later than usual, sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. Clara sat in front of him and looked at it for a moment with the expression of a man working up to something. "Drummond's wife is having a dinner Saturday," he said. "I heard," Clara said. "She was at the counter slicing bread. Her back was to him. She invited me." I told her no." Clara's knife stopped for just a half second. She kept her voice even. "You didn't have to do that." "I did it because I wanted to," Nathan said. "Not out of obligation to anything. I want to be clear about that." She turned around. He was looking at his coffee again, turning it in his hands, but there was something deliberate in how he'd said it, the same quality he'd had when he told her about Dora Alcott 2 weeks ago. Setting something down in the open where both of them could see it clearly. "Gerald Drummond is going to be irritated," she said. "Gerald Drummond is frequently irritated. He manages. Mrs. Drummond is going to say things. Mrs. Drummond always says things. She says so many things that most of them cancel each other out." He looked up. "I'm not interested in Dora Alcott, Clara. I wasn't before you came here and I'm not now. but I want to make sure you don't sit here thinking otherwise because I suspect Birch told you about the dinner before the bread was off the stove this morning." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "He did," she admitted. "I figured." Nathan set down his cup. "You all right?" The question surprised her enough that she took a moment before answering. "Why wouldn't I be?" "Because you've been out in that garden pulling weeds since 6 this morning, and it's now past 7 in the evening, and Holt says you've been out there every spare minute for 4 days straight." She hadn't realized he'd noticed. That was the thing about Nathan Cole, he didn't appear to be watching, and then it turned out he had seen everything. "The garden needed work," she said. "The garden is the cleanest it's been in 3 years, he said. "Clara." She met his eyes. "Are you all right?" he said again, quieter this time, and she understood that he wasn't asking whether she was functional. He was asking the other thing, the harder thing, the thing people rarely asked. "I'm fine," she said, and the careful, controlled way she said it answered a different question than the words did, and they both knew it, and Nathan Cole looked at her with that still attentive gaze, and didn't push, which was exactly what she needed him to do. "All right," he said. He drank his coffee. She finished slicing the bread. The kitchen settled back into its quiet, and somehow the quiet felt different than it had an hour ago, warmer or more honest, or both. Saturday came and went. Nathan spent it on the ranch. Mrs. Drummond's dinner happened without him, and whatever conclusions Red Valley drew from his absence, they kept to themselves for approximately 4 days before the conclusions started making their way back to the ranch in the form of Birch, who was constitutionally incapable of sitting on information for longer than a week. People are saying, Birch reported on Wednesday morning, with the tone of a man delivering a message he wished he'd never agreed to carry, that Mr. Cole is making a mistake. "People say that about most things," Holt said without looking up from his plate. "They're saying specifically..." Birch glanced at Clara, who was at the stove, and lowered his voice in the way people lowered their voices when they thought lowering it would be sufficient, which it wasn't. "They're saying he's got himself too comfortable with the current arrangement, and that it ain't appropriate. Given the difference in..." He couldn't finish the sentence. "In what I look like," Clara said completely calmly from the stove. Birch looked stricken. "I didn't say that. I know you didn't." She turned around. "And you can tell whoever told you that I am employed here. That's the arrangement. Nothing about it requires anyone else's approval." "Yes, ma'am," Birch said quietly. She turned back to the stove. Holt reached for his coffee cup and set into it at a volume designed for his own ears, but audible to everyone within 10 feet. People always got opinions about things that ain't their business. It was the longest editorial statement she had ever heard from him, and she filed it away as something she would be grateful for later when she had the privacy to be grateful properly. Nathan heard about it from Gerald Drummond himself. She didn't know this until 2 days later, when she couldn't help but overhear the kitchen wall was not built for privacy, and neither man seemed to account for her presence. A conversation happening on the front porch that she walked into the middle of, like stepping off a porch step that wasn't there. "I'm going to say this as a friend," Gerald Drummond's voice said, carrying the comfortable authority of a man who had never once been contradicted by anyone he respected. "That woman is not doing your reputation any favors. People are watching you, Nathan." "Let them watch," Nathan said. "That ain't a serious answer." "I know you think so. She doesn't belong here." Gerald's voice sharpened. "Not because she's a bad person. Maybe she ain't. But she's not the kind of woman a man like you has working in his house, and you know it. You're giving people the wrong idea." Silence from Nathan. "Dora Alcott asked about you again," Gerald said, changing his approach. "Her father would welcome a conversation. You know what that land would mean added to yours. You know what a match like that would do for your standing in this county." "I know what you think it would do," Nathan said. "Nathan." "Gerald." A pause. Nathan's voice was quiet in the way things were quiet right before they stopped being quiet. "I'm going to thank you for coming out, and I'm going to ask you to leave it there. What happens on this ranch is my business. Who works in this house is my business, and I would be grateful if you carried that back to town with you." A long silence. "You're making an error," Gerald said. "I hope you see it before it costs you something." "I'll take that chance," Nathan said. Boots on the porch steps, a horse departing. Clara stood in the kitchen with a dish towel in her hands and did not move for a long moment. Then Nathan came through the door and found her standing there and understood immediately what had happened. He looked at her. She looked at him. "How much of that did you hear?" he said. "Enough," she said. I took off his hat and set it on the table and pulled out a chair and sat down in it like a man deciding to be somewhere instead of just passing through it. "You deserve to know he said it, and you deserve to know I meant what I told him." Clara set down the dish towel. She sat down across from him. Outside, Holt was hammering something, and Birch was talking to one of the horses in the low, earnest tone he used when he thought nobody could hear him. "He's not entirely wrong," she said. "About what people think. I know what people think. It's not a small thing, Nathan, for you." He looked at her steadily. "It's not a small thing for you either. You're the one who has to walk into that general store. You're the one who has to listen to Dora Alcott perform her opinions in public. You're the one this town has been taking shots at since you arrived." He paused. "It ain't nothing for me, but it ain't equal." She was quiet. Outside, the hammering stopped. "Why are you doing this?" she said. "I don't mean I'm not asking to put you on the spot. I just want to understand it." Nathan looked at his hands on the table, big and weathered and honest. "Because you're good at this work," he said, "and you deserve to do it somewhere you're treated with respect." He paused again, longer this time. "And because since you came here, this place feels like somebody lives in it again, instead of just endures it." He said the last part quietly, like a thing he'd been examining for a while and was now setting down somewhere outside of himself for the first time. "That matters to me." Clara felt the weight of it settle into her chest, not like a burden, but like the opposite of one. Like something being put down after a long time of carrying it. "It matters to me too," she said. She said it simply and without ornamentation because it was the truth and it didn't need anything added to it. The letter arrived the following Monday, and it changed everything. It came addressed to Nathan Cole from a law firm in Abilene, and it sat on the kitchen table unopened from the time the postwriter dropped it off at mid-morning until Nathan came in for lunch. Clara put it beside his plate without comment and said nothing. He opened it. He read it. He read it again. Then he set it down on the table with the careful movements of someone trying very hard to keep their face doing nothing, which in Clara's experience of reading him meant something significant had happened. "Everything all right?" she asked. "My brother wants to sell the eastern pasture," Nathan said. "Your brother? Thomas. He's a partner on the land, technically. Our father left us equal shares when he died, and Thomas took cash and I took acreage, and we agreed the eastern pasture was joint until we could settle on a fair price." He paused. "He's found a buyer." "Is that a problem?" Nathan looked at her. "The buyer is Earl Alcott." The name landed in the kitchen like a stone in still water. Earl Alcott, Dora's father. The wealthiest rancher in the county. The man who had, through Gerald Drummond, sent a message that his daughter's interest in Nathan Cole would be welcomed. Clara understood immediately and completely what it meant, what it was designed to mean, what it was designed to do, and she watched Nathan understand it too. Watched the realization move across his face like weather. "How much land?" she said. 40 acres. Runs right along the northern edge of my property." He picked up the letter again, read a line, set it back down. "If Alcott gets that land, he's got access to my water source. The creek runs through it." "Can he control your water?" "He can make my life very difficult," Nathan said. "Legally, no. Practically, yes." "And Thomas? Thomas needs the money." He said it without bitterness, but without pretense either. "He always has. He's got a family in Abilene, and debts, and this land has never been what it is to me. He's not doing it to cause trouble. He's doing it because somebody offered him a fair price." "Who found him the buyer?" Nathan looked at her. "Gerald Drummond," he said. Clara sat down. She put her hands flat on the table and looked at them. "They're applying pressure," she said. "They are. To make you reconsider certain things." Certain things, he agreed. They looked at each other across the kitchen table, and the thing that had been growing quietly between them for 5 weeks sat in the room like a third person present and acknowledged, and neither of them quite ready to name it directly, but both of them aware that its presence was exactly what this pressure was intended to address. "What are you going to do?" Clara asked. "I'm going to buy Thomas out myself," Nathan said. "I've got enough set aside. It'll be tight for a season, but I can manage it." He paused. "And I'm going to tell Gerald Drummond to stop using my neighbors to try to arrange my life." "He won't like that." "I know. He'll make it harder for you in town." "He'll try." Nathan looked at her with that steady dark gaze. "What he won't do is tell me who works in my house or who matters on this ranch." Clara was quiet for a moment. She felt something she didn't have a clean name for, a complicated mixture of gratitude and worry, and something softer underneath both. "I don't want to cost you your land or your standing," she said carefully. "If it ever came to that." "Don't," Nathan said. It came out firmly, but not harshly. "Don't do that. Don't make yourself the problem when the problem is men who think they can engineer other people's choices." He met her eyes. "You are not the problem." She looked at him. "All right," she said. He picked up the letter and folded it and put it in his shirt pocket and finished his lunch, and Clara refilled his coffee and went back to her work, and the afternoon continued. But the ground had shifted. She could feel it. Something underneath them had moved, settled into a new configuration, and whatever was built on top of it would have to account for that. She told herself very firmly on a Tuesday evening that she needed to be careful. She was sitting on the edge of her bed in the back room after the house had gone quiet, and she was having a conversation with herself that she should have had weeks ago and had been avoiding with the expert efficiency of someone who was very good at not looking directly at things that frightened them. She was not a fool. She knew what was happening inside her. She had known since the garden fence, since the coffee on Fridays, since the kitchen conversation about Dora Alcott. Since the way Nathan Cole looked at her. Sometimes like she was a problem, he was genuinely interested in solving instead of ignoring. She knew what it felt like. She also knew with the cold, clear knowledge of a woman who had lived 25 years in a world that had very specific opinions about what she deserved. Exactly what happened to women like her when they let themselves feel things like this about men like that. They got hurt. That was what happened. They got hurt in a very particular way, not violently, not dramatically, but in the slow, ground-down way of a hope that nobody ever directly attacked, but that gradually ran out of room to exist in. She had watched it happen to her mother, who was a large woman who had loved a man who loved her back until his family made the cost of that love clear. She had watched her mother carry that particular wound for the rest of her life, not loudly, but always there like a limp you learn to walk around. Clara did not intend to limp, so she sat on the edge of her bed and she told herself to be careful. Careful with what she let herself hope. Careful with what she read into a steady gaze and a cup of coffee received with 2 hands. Careful. The problem was that being careful was starting to feel like being dishonest, and she had always found dishonesty harder to sustain than most things. She went to sleep with nothing resolved and woke up to make breakfast, and the morning was ordinary, and Nathan ate his biscuits and said they were good, and Holt nodded, and Birch talked too much, and the day proceeded. But in the afternoon, when Nathan passed through the kitchen and stopped for a moment by the window where she was taking in the dry herbs she'd been hanging since June, he said, without particular preface, "Garden looks good." "Thank you," she said. "You put in a second row of beans." The soil on the east side was being wasted. She snipped a stem. "I hope that was all right. I should have asked." "You don't need to ask about the garden," he said. "It's more yours than mine at this point." She looked up. I was looking out the window at the garden with an expression she had come to recognize, not the emptied, grief-hollowed look of Friday afternoons, but something quieter and more present. Something that lived in the now rather than the past. "Mary tried every year," he said. "She had a good instinct for plants, but the soil out there fought her. She'd have liked knowing someone finally got the better of it." He said it simply, without pain and without performance. Just as a fact. A small, true, offered thing. Clara looked at the dried herbs in her hand. What did she grow? Tried lavender mostly, and sweet peas. He paused. She said sweet peas smelled like optimism. I told her that was a strange thing to say about a flower, and she said I had no imagination. A beat. Something that was almost a smile. She was right. Clara laughed, a quiet, genuine sound, and Nathan turned from the window and looked at her, and the almost smile became something a little more definite, a little more present, a little more his. She looked back at her herbs. Her heart was doing something she'd told it very specifically not to do. I'll put in sweet peas next spring, she said, if I'm still here. The words landed before she thought them through. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Why wouldn't you be? He said. She kept her eyes on the herbs. I just meant circumstances change. I didn't want to assume. He said quite directly and without preamble. I'd like you to stay. She looked at him. I'd like you to stay, he said again, as though he was making sure the words were exactly right. Not because of the cooking, not because of the garden. He held her gaze. Because of what you said about my father reading aloud, and what you said about keeping promises to people who can't receive them anymore. Because you left coffee on the table every Friday before I told you why, and you never once asked me to explain myself before I was ready. He paused. I'd like you to stay. The room was very quiet. Outside, Birch was talking to the chickens. Holt was somewhere near the fence line. The wind moved through the garden. I'd like to stay, Clara said. She said it looking directly at him clearly and without qualification, because she had decided in that exact moment, without planning it, that she was done being careful in the way that was really just a well-dressed version of hiding. Nathan nodded once. He picked up his hat from the peg by the door and put it on and walked out, and Clara turned back to her herbs, and her hands were shaking a little, and she did not attempt to stop them this time. The next morning, Dora Alcott came to the ranch. She came alone, which was unexpected, which was Clara understood the moment she saw her ride up precisely the point. A woman who came with companions could be written off as social. A woman who came alone was making a different kind of statement. Clara was the one who answered the door because Nathan was out in the north field, and Birch was with him, and Holt was at the fence. Dora looked at her for just a moment. A flicker of something that might have been surprise, recalibrated into composure, so quickly it was almost impressive. Miss Whitfield, Dora said. Miss Alcott. Clara stepped back. Mr. Cole is out. You're welcome to wait. Dora came in. She stood in the kitchen with the practiced ease of a woman who was used to making every room she entered understand that she was the most important thing in it. Her eyes moved over the kitchen. The curtains Clara had put up in the third week, the herbs hanging in the window, the second row of beans visible through the glass, the particular order and warmth of a space that had been cared for by someone who intended to keep caring for it. Clara watched her see it, and watched her understand what it meant. You've made changes, Dora said. Mr. Cole wanted the place to feel lived in, Clara said pleasantly. Dora sat down at the table with the confident ease of someone who didn't ask permission. You've been here nearly 6 weeks. That's right. And you plan to stay. As long as Mr. Cole needs me, Clara said. Can I offer you coffee while you wait? Dora looked at her. The performance of pleasantness dropped by a few degrees. I'll be honest with you, Miss Whitfield. Please, Clara said, and meant it. Nathan Cole is a good man from a good family with good land. He's the kind of man that a town builds itself around. His choices matter not just to him. She folded her hands on the table, controlled and deliberate. What's happening here? The situation, the arrangement. It's putting him in a position that isn't fair to him. People talk. They make assumptions. And the assumptions being made right now are not good for his reputation or his future. She paused. I'm not saying this to be cruel. I know you believe that, Clara said. It would be better for everyone, including you, if you found a position elsewhere. Dora held her gaze. I think you know that. Clara stood across the table from her with the coffee pot in her hand, and felt the words land exactly where they were intended to land. She had heard versions of this speech her entire life, sometimes cruder, sometimes kinder, but always the same underneath. You are not what is wanted here, and the kindest thing you can do is know it." She set the coffee pot down on the stove. "Miss Alcott," she said, "I appreciate plain speaking, so I'll give you some in return." She looked at her directly, clearly without heat, but without softness either. "Mr. Cole hired me. Mr. Cole has told me he'd like me to stay. If he reaches a different conclusion, I'll hear it from him." She paused. "Not from anyone else." Dora looked at her for a long moment. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. "Maybe I am," Clara said. "But the decision about what's right for this ranch belongs to the man who owns it, not to his neighbors." The door opened. Nathan came in hat in hand, reading the room in the way he read everything fast, thorough, missing nothing. He looked at Dora. He looked at Clara. "Miss Alcott," he said. His voice was even. "I wasn't expecting you." "I was in the area," Dora said, recovering her composure smoothly, standing and offering a smile that had been practiced until it looked natural. "I thought I'd stop by." "That's kind of you." He went to the water basin and washed his hands with the unhurried movements of a man buying himself time to think. "What brings you this far north?" "I wanted to talk to you," Dora said. "About the eastern pasture, actually. My father mentioned." "I've written to Thomas," Nathan said, drying his hands, turning around. "I'm buying him out. The eastern pasture stays with this ranch." He said it without anger and without apology. Just as a fact, a decided thing. Dora's expression shifted. "That's your father's arrangement was?" "My business," Nathan said pleasantly. "Thank you for coming out, Miss Alcott." The dismissal was so clean and so courteous that it took Dora a moment to recognize it. When she did, she gathered herself, said something polite that none of them would remember, and left. The kitchen was very quiet after the door closed. Nathan looked at Clara. "How long was she here?" he said. "Long enough," Clara said. "Did she say what I imagined she said?" "Probably." He looked at her steadily. And I told her," Clara said, "that if you reached a different conclusion about my employment, I'd hear it from you." Something in Nathan Cole's expression shifted, something she was starting to recognize, that particular opening in his face that happened when he decided something. "That's correct," he said. She picked up the coffee pot. "Lunch is in 20 minutes. Clara?" She looked at him. "Thank you," he said. And this time, it meant something different and larger and further reaching than coffee on a Friday afternoon, and both of them knew it. "You're welcome," she said the same way she always said it. But she was smiling when she turned back to the stove quietly and to herself, in the particular private way of a woman who has just realized that she is not, after all, going to have to spend her whole life being careful. The cattle auction happened every year on the last Saturday of August, and it was the single largest gathering. Red Valley produced bigger than the church socials, bigger than the 4th of July, bigger than anything else the county could manufacture. Every rancher within 40 miles came in for it. Every merchant opened early. Every family put on their good clothes and their good manners and came to see and be seen, which was, in Clara's experience, what most large gatherings were actually for, underneath whatever practical purpose they claimed. Nathan had been preparing for it for 2 weeks. The Cole Ranch had 30 head going to auction, the best of the season's yield, and Nathan had spent those 2 weeks in a focused, quiet kind of intensity that Clara had come to recognize as his version of high feeling, not loud, not demonstrative, but present in everything. In the way he moved through the house at the end of each day, and sat at the kitchen table with his papers spread out and his coffee going cold, while he worked the numbers with the careful attention of a man who understood exactly what was at stake. Clara had kept the coffee warm and the house quiet and left him to it. What she had not done, what she had been carefully, deliberately not doing, was think too much about what the auction meant in terms of Red Valley and Red Valley's opinions, and the particular confluence of forces that had been building since Dora Alcott's visit 3 weeks ago. She thought about it now. She thought about it on Friday morning while she was taking bread out of the oven, while Nathan was already out checking the cattle, while Birch sat at the table and ate his breakfast with the slightly too casual expression of someone managing a piece of information. "You're going to the auction," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am," Birch said. "All of us. Mr. Cole needs hands to manage the cattle in the pen. And the whole town will be there. Pretty much the whole county, Birch said. He looked at his plate. Miss Clara, you don't have to go if you don't want to. I mean, there's plenty to do here. Nobody would think anything of it if you... I'll be going, she said. He looked up. I work on this ranch, she said. The auction is ranch business. I'll be going. Birch nodded slowly. He had the expression of a young man who admired something and was worried about it at the same time. Yes, ma'am, he said. She put the bread on the rack and did not allow herself to second-guess it. Nathan said nothing about her attending until Thursday evening when he came in and found her pressing her blue calico dress. Her best one, the one she saved for occasions, and stopped in the kitchen doorway. You're coming Saturday, he said. Yes, she said. If that's all right. He looked at her for a moment. It's all right, he said. I want you there. She kept the iron moving. You should know that people will talk. People already talk. This will be different. This will be all of them at once. Nathan came into the kitchen and sat down at the table in the deliberate way he had of occupying a space when he intended to say something that required being seated for. Clara, I've been thinking about something and I want to say it plainly. She set the iron down and looked at him. When this auction is done, he said, I intend to make some things clear, to the town, about this ranch and about who matters on it. He held her gaze. I wanted you to know that before Saturday, so it doesn't catch you off guard. She looked at him across the kitchen table, this steady-weathered, plain-spoken man who expressed everything important, sideways and quietly, and without the first trace of performance. What kind of things? She said carefully. The kind that needs saying out loud, he said, in front of people. Her heart did the thing she'd told it to stop doing. She kept her face composed. Nathan, you don't have to make any kind of statement on my account. I know I don't have to, he said. That's why it means something that I'm going to. She sat down across from him. She put her hands flat on the table between them, and she looked at him directly, because this was too important for sideways. I need you to be sure, she said. Not for my sake, for yours. Because once you say something like that in front of this town, you can't unsay it. And the people who've been working against us, Gerald Drummond and Earl Alcott and all the rest of them, they will make it harder for you. Business harder, neighbor harder, all of it. I know that. And you're sure. I've been sure, he said quietly, for longer than I've been willing to admit it. Even to myself. The kitchen was very quiet. All right, she said. She picked up the iron and went back to her dress, and Nathan sat at the table for a little while longer, without speaking, and Holt came in and poured himself coffee and said nothing. And somewhere outside, Birch was explaining something to the horses again, and the evening moved through the house the way evenings did, when something large and irrevocable was standing just on the other side of the next few days waiting. Saturday arrived, the way important days always did, faster than expected, and with better weather than deserved. The auction grounds were on the east edge of town, a wide flat stretch of land with temporary pens and a raised platform for the auctioneer, and room for what felt like the entire county to mill around and conduct business and examine each other's cattle and each other's choices with equal thoroughness. Nathan drove the wagon in with Holt beside him on the seat. Clara sat in the back with Birch, who spent the ride pointing out landmarks she already knew, and making cheerful observations about the weather that she understood were his way of managing his own nerves. She wore the blue calico dress, and her good boots, and her hair pinned up properly, and she sat straight in the wagon bed. Because that was what she had always done. Sat straight, held herself correctly, refused to make herself smaller than she was. They arrived to find the grounds already half full. She could feel the attention shift toward them before the wagon had fully stopped the particular quality of awareness that moved through a crowd when something they'd been discussing arrived in person. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Eyes moved from Nathan to her and back to Nathan with the swift key of people adding things up. Nathan stepped down from the wagon and came around to help her down with the same natural ease he'd extend to anyone not making a production of it, just doing it, his hand steady under hers. She stepped down and stood beside him and lifted her chin. Ready, he said quietly. Yes, she said. They walked into the auction grounds together. The first hour was business. Nathan moved through the crowd with the focused efficiency of a man who had work to do, checking his cattle in the pens, speaking with the auctioneer, conferring with two neighboring ranchers about prices. Clara stayed close, observing, helping where she could, making herself useful in the practical ways she was good at. She felt the eyes. She had always felt eyes. She had simply developed over 25 years the ability to function completely normally while feeling them. She spoke when spoken to, smiled when it was warranted, and did not perform either discomfort or defiance. What she noticed, what was new, was the way the eyes moved between her and Nathan, and the way the town was watching. Not just her, but the two of them together, making calculations, reaching conclusions, some of them apparently not pleased with what they were adding up to. Mrs. Drummond was there. Of course she was. She stood with a cluster of women near the refreshment table and watched Clara with the expression of someone watching weather they'd predicted and weren't happy to be right about. Earl Alcott was there, a big man, well-fed and well-dressed, with the particular confidence of someone whose money had never let him down. He stood near the pen with Gerald Drummond, and when Nathan walked past them with Clara, Clara watched the look that passed between Alcott and Drummond, quick and assessing, and not friendly. Dora Alcott was there. She was wearing yellow, which suited her, and she stood with her friends near the platform, with the contained expression of a woman waiting for something. She looked at Clara once, a direct measuring look, and then looked away, and didn't look back, which Clara found somehow more unnerving than the alternative. The auction started at 10. Nathan's cattle went at 11, and they went well. The numbers came in strong, above what he'd projected, and she watched him receive the result with a nod, and the small private satisfaction of a man who had prepared thoroughly and been rewarded for it. Birch pumped his fist. Holt said, "Good." Nathan turned and found her eyes across the pen, and something passed between them. Quick, warm, real, and she smiled at him just briefly, and he nodded in that particular way that meant more than nodding. That was the moment Gerald Drummond chose. He came up beside Nathan with Earl Alcott 2 steps behind him, and his voice carried, not shouting, not crude, but pitched to be heard by the people immediately around them, which included a considerable number. "Strong showing, Nathan," Drummond said. "Good cattle." "Thank you," Nathan said. "You've had some good help this season, looks like." Drummond's eyes moved to Clara, and back, a deliberate transit that several people nearby tracked. "Though I imagine you'll be looking at making some changes. Now that the season's done, and you've had time to assess the arrangement." The word arrangement landed the way Drummond intended it to land. Clara kept her face still. Around them, the nearest conversations had gone quiet. Not obviously, not all at once, but gradually, like lights dimming in a theater. Nathan looked at Drummond with the steady, unreadable expression he used when he was deciding something. "I'm not looking at any changes," he said. Drummond smiled the way men smiled when they were about to say the thing they actually came to say. "Nathan, come on now. You're a smart man. You know how this looks. You know what people—" "Gerald." Nathan's voice didn't rise. It just stopped being casual. "I'm going to stop you there." Drummond stopped. "You've been in my business since June," Nathan said. "You sent a letter to my brother. You brought Earl Alcott out to pressure my land. You put your wife on the job of making this woman's life in this town harder than it needed to be." He was still perfectly even, perfectly controlled, each word set down like something with weight behind it. "I have been patient with that. I'm done being patient." Around them the quiet had spread. A circle of people 15-20 growing had found reasons to be standing nearby. Drummond's smile had gone. "Now I was just trying to—" "I know what you were trying to do," Nathan said. "And I'm telling you in front of whoever wants to hear it that it's done." He paused. "Miss Whitfield works on my ranch because she is exceptionally good at what she does, and because I respect her, and because what happens on my land is my business, not the county's." He looked at Drummond steadily. "We done?" Drummond looked at him. He looked at the people around them. He calculated. "You're making an error," Drummond said, because it was the only thing he had left. "You've said that before," Nathan said. "I'm still waiting to see it." Drummond looked at Earl Alcott. Alcott said nothing, which was its own answer. Drummond straightened his jacket and walked away with the deliberate, measured pace of a man determined to look like he was choosing to leave. The circle of onlookers shifted. Some drifted away. Some stayed watching Nathan with expressions ranging from surprised to thoughtful to calculating. Clara heard a woman somewhere to her left say something she couldn't make out, and the woman beside her respond in a low voice that sounded like it might have been approving. She looked at Nathan. He was looking at her. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Are you?" "Better than I've been in a while," he said. She thought it was over. She thought the worst of it had passed. She was wrong. It came from a direction she hadn't expected. Not Drummond, not the Alcotts, but from a man she didn't know. A rancher from the South County named Pershing, large and red-faced and apparently emboldened by what he'd witnessed, or perhaps by whatever he'd been drinking since morning. How was at the refreshment table when Clara came to get water, she was alone. Nathan was back at the pen. Birch and Holt were with him, and he looked her over with the frank, contemptuous assessment of a man who had decided he was entitled to. "You're the Cole woman," he said, loud enough. "I work for Mr. Cole," she said, the same answer she always gave. "Heard about you." He looked at her with a smile that wasn't friendly. "Heard Nathan Cole has lost his sense of judgment, along with his sense of proportion." He let his gaze travel over her slowly, deliberately, like he was making a point, and wanted to be sure it landed. "Though I reckon when a man's been without company long enough, his standards get—" "That's enough," said a voice. Not Nathan's voice. Birch had come up behind her, young, 20 years old. His face red and his jaw set in the absolute certainty of a young man who had decided something was wrong and wasn't going to stand there while it continued. "That's enough," Birch said again. "You don't talk to her like that." Pershing looked at Birch with the slow amusement of a man who didn't take 20-year-olds seriously. "Boy, I'll talk however I—" He said, "That's enough." That was Holt. Holt, who never raised his voice, who communicated through nods and silences, and the angle of his hat stood to Birch's left, with his coffee cup in his hand, and his eyes on Pershing, with the particular calm of a man who had seen a great deal of trouble in his life, and found he was no longer afraid of it. Pershing looked at Holt. He looked at Birch. He looked at Clara. Something shifted in his expression. The calculation of a man who has chosen a target he thought was undefended and discovered he was wrong. He walked away. Birch turned to Clara. His jaw was still set. His hands were slightly shaking. "You all right, Miss Clara?" She looked at him, this 20-year-old boy with his passionate conviction about right and wrong, standing beside this old man who'd said 4 words and meant every one of them. "I'm all right," she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "Thank you, both of you." Holt nodded once. He walked back toward the pen. Birch stayed a moment longer. "He shouldn't have said that," he said. "Nobody should talk to you like that." "I know," she said. "You're a good man, Birch." He blinked, surprised. It ain't right." "No," she agreed. "It ain't." She turned and walked back toward Nathan's pen, and she held herself straight, and she did not let the shaking in her hands become visible, and she breathed the way she'd learned to breathe after 25 years of this, slow and deliberate, through the feeling rather than around it. She was almost back to the pen when she ran into Dora Alcott. Not by accident. Dora had placed herself with precision between the refreshment table and the pen in a spot that required Clara to either go through her or go significantly around her. Clara stopped. Dora looked at her with an expression that was different from any Clara had seen on her before. Not the practiced pleasantness of the kitchen visit, not the performing confidence of the general store. Something stripped back. Something closer to real. "I heard what Pershing said," Dora said quietly. Clara said nothing. "That was ugly," Dora said. "I want you to know I don't want that. What I said to you in Nathan's kitchen was one thing. What Pershing said is another." Clara looked at her for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" Dora was quiet a beat. "Because I've been watching you all morning," she said. "And I've been watching him." She paused. "And I can see it. What's between you two?" She looked away briefly, then back. "I don't like it. But I can see it's real." She said it like a thing that cost her something to say. I want you to know that's not what I wanted. The ugliness. I was protecting something I thought I deserved, and there's a difference between that and cruelty." Clara studied her face. "I appreciate you saying so," she said finally. Simply, without excess. Dora nodded. She stepped aside. Clara walked through. Nathan found her 20 minutes later, standing at the edge of the grounds where it was quieter, looking out at the plain beyond the town. He came to stand beside her without speaking, which was one of the things about him she had come to trust absolutely, his instinct for when words were needed and when presence was enough. They stood together for a moment. "Birch told me about Pershing," he said. "Birch talks too much." "He does." A pause. "Are you all right?" "I've been asked that several times today," she said. "I know. Are you?" She was quiet for a moment. Honest. "I'm tired," she said. "Not of today specifically. Just tired in a longer way. Of always being the thing that needs defending. Of walking into a room and having half the people in it decide what I'm worth before I've opened my mouth." She paused. "I know that's not today's problem. I know today was actually Clara." She stopped. "What that man said to you," Nathan said, "was wrong. What this town has been doing since you arrived was wrong. I should have said that more directly, and I should have said it sooner, and I'm sorry I didn't." She looked at him. "You've been fighting your own corner since the day you walked into this county," he said. "You shouldn't have had to do that alone." "You weren't doing nothing," she said. "I wasn't doing enough." He said it plainly, no self-pity in it, just the clean acknowledgement of a man who had looked at something clearly and found it wanting. "I intend to do better." She looked at him across the distance between them, which was not very far, and yet had been for the entire past several weeks, bridged only by coffee cups and garden fences and Friday afternoons, and all the small sideways careful things that two people did when they were circling something they weren't ready to name. "What does better look like?" she asked. He turned toward her. His eyes were direct and dark and entirely certain. "It looks like telling you that I am not confused about what I feel," he said, "and I'm not confused about what I want. And I have been careful because you deserved careful. You deserved not to be rushed or pressured or have something else decided for you without your full understanding of what it meant." Her heart had stopped doing anything complicated. It was just beating, just simply steadily beating. "Nathan," she said, "I know it's not. I know there are 100 reasons this is complicated," he said. "I know what this town thinks. I know what it costs you to be here. I know what I'm asking is not a simple thing, and I'm not asking you to decide anything today." He paused. "I just need you to know where I stand, so that there's no ambiguity between us, so you know what's true." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the woman in the back room of her heart, the careful one, the one who had learned to keep things small and manageable and unlikely to cause pain. She thought about her mother's limp. She thought about the morning she'd stood on the dusty road outside Red Valley with $43 and a minister's letter and the willingness to be wrong about people just one more time. "I know where I stand too," she said. The words came out clear and direct and without apology, and she held his gaze the whole time she said them because she was done with sideways. Nathan Cole looked at her. Something in his face opened, not dramatically, not with performance, but in the way a room opened when someone finally raised the window. Quietly. Completely. "All right then," he said. "All right," she said. Around them. The auction ground continued its business. Cattle and prices, and the ordinary machinery of a county making its living. Somewhere behind them, Birch was almost certainly watching, and would almost certainly report back to Holt with great enthusiasm. The Drummonds were somewhere in the crowd. The Alcotts. The whole apparatus of Red Valley's opinion grinding away. None of it felt as large as it had an hour ago. Nathan put his hat back on. "Ready to go back in?" She straightened. She lifted her chin. "Yes," she said. They walked back into the crowd together, and this time they walked side by side with the unhurried, undefensive certainty of two people who had decided something and didn't need the world's permission to have decided it. And if Red Valley stared well, Red Valley could stare. Clara Whitfield had been looked at her entire life by people who thought looking gave them authority over what they saw. She had decided somewhere between a dusty road and a kitchen table and a bunch of Friday wildflowers that it didn't. It was late afternoon when the trouble found them again, and this time it was the kind that didn't walk away. Earl Alcott waited until the auction was winding down, until the crowd had thinned enough that what he was about to do would be witnessed but not lost in noise. He was a precise man, Earl Alcott. Precise and patient and accustomed to timing. He stepped in front of Nathan as they were heading to the wagon. Clara was 2 steps to Nathan's right, Holt and Birch behind them. Alcott looked at Nathan. He didn't look at Clara at all, which was its own form of statement, the dismissal of someone he'd decided didn't exist at a level worth acknowledging. "Cole," he said, "we need to talk about the eastern pasture." "We've been through that," Nathan said. "I wrote to Thomas. The sale's not happening." "Thomas has changed his mind," Alcott said. Nathan went still. "I increased my offer," Alcott said. "Substantially. Thomas accepted this morning. I have the paperwork." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document with the deliberate calm of a man who had been planning this moment for a while and was enjoying the delivery of it. "The eastern pasture transfers to me at the end of the month." Clara watched Nathan's jaw work. She watched him absorb it. The thing he'd thought was settled becoming unsettled, the ground he thought he'd secured shifting underneath him. "Thomas can't do that," Nathan said. "We had an agreement." "A verbal agreement," Alcott said pleasantly. "Between brothers. The land was jointly held. He had every legal right. You went behind my back," Nathan said. "Still even. Still controlled." But she could hear what was underneath it now. The particular fury of a man who has been maneuvered and knows it, and knows also that losing his control is exactly what the other man is hoping for. "I made a legal offer to a legal co-owner," Alcott said. "Nathan, I want to be straight with you." He clasped his hands in front of him with the posture of a man about to offer generosity. "I'm not your enemy. I'm not trying to hurt your operation. I'm trying to do business." A pause. "And I think you and I both know that certain situations make business harder, for everyone involved." Nathan looked at him. "I want the pasture," Alcott said. "You want your operation to run without interference." He let that sit for a moment. "I think we can come to an understanding if you're willing to have a reasonable conversation about other matters." The other matters hung in the air between them like smoke. Clara understood exactly what he was saying. She stood 2 steps away, and she understood every word of what he wasn't saying, and she felt the old familiar weight of it. Not new, not surprising, but still heavy. The weight of being the bargaining chip in a transaction nobody had asked her to participate in. She said nothing. She waited. Nathan turned to look at her. Just briefly. Just enough. Then he turned back to Earl Alcott. "Here's what I'm going to do," Nathan said. "I'm going to talk to Thomas, in person. Not by letter, not through a third party. I'm going to get on a horse and ride to Abilene, and sit down with my brother, and find out what he was actually offered, and what he was actually told." He took a single step toward Alcott, and his voice dropped just slightly, which made it carry better rather than less. "And if I find out that the offer included any representation about what would change on my ranch if he sold, then you and I are going to have a much less pleasant conversation than this one." Alcott looked at him. Some of the pleasantness left his face. "That pasture will be mine by the end of the month," he said. "Maybe," Nathan said. "But the rest of it, what goes on at my ranch, who works there, who matters there, that's mine. That was mine before you made your offer, and it'll be mine after. No piece of land changes that." He held Alcott's gaze with the flat, certain steadiness of a man who had decided something a long time ago and was merely confirming it now. "We done." Alcott said nothing. Nathan put on his hat and walked to the wagon. Clara followed. Holt followed. Birch, vibrating with something between outrage and admiration, followed last. They rode back toward the ranch in the long golden light of late afternoon, the wagon moving steadily through the grass, the sound of the auction ground fading behind them into the wide, unhurried quiet of the plains. Nobody spoke for a while. Then Birch said, "Are we is the pasture?" "I'm riding to Abilene Monday," Nathan said. "Yes, sir?" Birch paused. "What about—" "Birch," Holt said. Birch closed his mouth. Clara sat in the wagon bed and looked out at the grass moving in the evening wind, and felt the full weight of the day settling on her, not crushing, not defeating, but large. It had been a large day, the kind that changed the shape of things. She thought about Nathan's face when he turned to look at her before answering Alcott. Just that one look. Just checking. Not asking permission, he didn't need permission. Just seeing her. Making sure she was there. She had been there. She was there. The ranch came into view as the sun went low. The house with its curtained windows and its garden and its smell of dried herbs through the open kitchen door. And Clara looked at it the way she had not allowed herself to look at things she was afraid of wanting directly, without hedging, without the exit already planned. She looked at it like it was hers. Not because it belonged to her. Not yet, and maybe not ever in the way deeds and titles described belonging, but in the way that a place became yours when you made it better. When you put your hands in its soil, and your care into its walls, and your grief into its quiet, and your hope, careful, stubborn, persistent hope, into the thing that grew in the space between two people when they finally stopped pretending it wasn't there. Nathan jumped down from the wagon and came around and offered his hand to help her down the way he always did, the way he'd done since the first day, like it was the most ordinary thing. She took his hand. She stepped down. She did not let go right away. Neither did he. "Monday," he said quietly for her ears. "I'll be back by Wednesday, Thursday at the latest." "I know," she said. "The ranch will be fine." "I know that too." He looked at her. The last of the light was on his face, and he looked in that light like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and had recently put it down and was still getting used to what it felt like to stand straight. "Clara," he said. "Go see your brother," she said. "Fix the land. Come home." The word home dropped into the evening air between them, and sat there right where she'd put it, deliberate and clear, and without apology. Nathan Cole's hand tightened briefly around hers. Then he let go and went to see to the horses, and Holt went with him, and Birch followed, talking about dinner, and Clara walked into the kitchen and put the kettle on, and stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the garden where the sweet peas would grow next spring. She had said, "Come home." She had meant every letter of it. And for the first time in 25 years, standing in a kitchen that smelled of dried herbs and warm bread, and everything she had made with her own two hands. Clara Whitfield felt without reservation, and without the exit already planned, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Nathan left for Abilene on Monday before dawn. Clara heard him moving through the house in the dark, the particular quiet efficiency of a man who had packed his own bags and saddled his own horse, his entire adult life, and saw no reason to make noise about it. She lay still in the back room and listened to the sounds of him. Boots on the kitchen floor, the soft pull of a drawer, the front door opening and closing with the careful click of someone trying not to wake the house. She lay still for another few minutes after the hoofbeats faded. Then she got up and made the coffee and started the breakfast, and told herself very firmly and with complete conviction that she was not going to spend the next 3 days watching the Northern Road. She watched the Northern Road for 3 days. Not constantly, not pathetically. She had work to do, and she did it: the bread and the meals and the garden and the mending that had piled up, and the 2 windows on the west side of the house that had needed recaulking since July, and that she'd been working up to addressing. She did all of it with her usual efficiency, and she did not mention Nathan Cole's name more than was strictly necessary in conversation with Birch and Holt, and she slept adequately and ate properly, and was by all observable measures completely fine. But the Northern Road existed in the corner of her awareness, the way a candle existed in a dark room. Not the thing you were looking at, but the thing that changed the quality of everything else. Birch lasted until Tuesday afternoon. He said Wednesday at the latest, Birch said with the tone of a man delivering information he believed was helpful. "I know what he said," Clara said, "just in case you'd forgotten." Birch: "Yes, ma'am." "Go fix the fence Holt marked on the east side." "Yes, ma'am." He went. Holt, who had been sitting on the porch with his coffee and watching this exchange with the expression of a man watching weather he'd predicted, said nothing, which was his form of saying everything. Tuesday evening, a rider came from town. Not a messenger, a woman. One Clara didn't immediately recognize, small and dark-haired and somewhere past 50, who tied her horse at the gate and came to the door with the careful, straight-backed posture of someone who had thought about making this trip for a while before deciding to make it. Clara answered the door. "Miss Whitfield," the woman said. "My name is Ruth Carey. I run the millinery on 2nd Street. She paused. "I don't know if you've come into my shop." "I haven't had occasion yet," Clara said. "No." Ruth Carey looked at her with eyes that were direct and not unkind. "I heard what happened at the auction, with Pershing." A breath. "I want to tell you that what he said was wrong. I've known Roy Pershing for 20 years, and he's never once needed a reason to be unpleasant to someone he's decided is beneath him, and I'm ashamed it took me this long to say so to somebody he's done it to." Clara looked at her for a moment. "Would you like to come in?" she said. Ruth Carey sat at the kitchen table and accepted coffee and said without being asked, "There are more of us than you know, who think Red Valley has handled your arrival badly." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "We're not loud about it, that's our failure, but we're there." "Why are you telling me this?" Clara asked, not challenging, genuinely asking. "Because I watched you walk back into that crowd after Pershing with your back straight and your head up, and I thought that woman is doing our job for us, carrying something she shouldn't have to carry alone." Ruth looked at her directly. "And I thought it was time one of us said so." Clara sat with that. "Thank you," she said. "That means more than you know." Ruth nodded. She finished her coffee. She stood to leave, then turned at the door. "Nathan Cole is a good man," she said. "He's also been alone long enough that he sometimes forgets how much he's allowed to have." She looked at Clara with something that was almost a smile. "I don't think he's forgetting anymore." She left. Clara stood in the kitchen for a long moment after the hoofbeats faded, feeling the unexpected particular warmth of having been seen by someone she hadn't expected to be seen by. It was a small thing. It was also not small at all. She went back to the stove. She realized, going to be all right. Whether Nathan came back Wednesday or Thursday, or she made herself think it clean and clear, whether something in Abilene changed what she believed was decided between them, she was going to be all right. She had been all right before. She knew how. But she found standing at that stove in the quiet of the ranch house, with the evening coming down outside, and the garden settled, and the smell of bread in the air, that all right was no longer enough to aim for. That somewhere between a dusty road and a cup of coffee, and a man who said, "I'd like you to stay," without requiring anything back from her, she had started aiming higher. She intended to keep doing that. Nathan came back Wednesday. Not in the evening, which is what she'd prepared herself for. He came back in the early afternoon, and she heard Delia's hooves on the road before she saw anything, and she did not run to the window. She finished what she was doing at the counter. She was chopping carrots with complete and total focus, and then she put down the knife and went to the window because she was only human. He looked road-worn and tired and entirely himself, and Birch met him at the gate with the enthusiasm of a retriever and said something that made Nathan pause and look toward the house. Clara stepped back from the window. She was at the stove when he came through the door, which was exactly where she intended to be, calm, composed, occupied, not waiting in the kitchen doorway like something out of a sentimental novel. "You're back," she said. "Wednesday," he said. "Like I said. How's Thomas?" He came to the table and sat down and took off his hat and set it on the table and rubbed his face with both hands, the gesture of a man setting down something heavy. She poured him coffee without asking and brought it to the table and sat down across from him. "Thomas is Thomas," he said. "Decent man in a tight corner making the best decision he knows how to make." He wrapped his hands around the cup. He didn't know what Alcott was buying the land to do with it. He just knew the price was good. "Did you tell him?" "I told him." Nathan paused. He felt terrible about it. But the sale went through. It went through. He said it without heat, but without pretense either. Thomas needed the money, and the money's spent, and what's done is done. He took a drink of his coffee. But I talked to the Alcott family's lawyer while I was there. Clara looked at him. Thomas agreed in writing that the water access stays with the Cole Ranch regardless of the land transfer. Alcott can have his 40 acres. He doesn't get my creek. He agreed to that. He didn't have much choice. The original land agreement, which nobody had looked at carefully, including Alcott's specified water rights, stayed with the primary property. A pause. He was angry, but he was legally wrong, and his lawyer knew it. Something that was almost satisfaction crossed Nathan's face. Earl Alcott does not like being legally wrong. I imagine not, Clara said. He'll look for other leverage, Nathan said. He's that kind of man. But the ranch is secure, and the water is secure, and there's nothing he can do about either one. He looked at her. How was it here? Fine, she said. Ruth Carey came by Tuesday evening. Nathan's eyebrows went up slightly. Ruth. She wanted me to know that what Pershing said at the auction was wrong. Clara paused. She said there are more people in this town who think we've been treated badly than it might appear. Nathan was quiet for a moment, turning his cup. Ruth's a good woman, he said. She was friends with Mary. He said Mary's name the way he'd been saying it lately, naturally, without the careful distance he'd maintained when Clara first arrived, as though the name had rejoined ordinary life from wherever grief had sent it. She doesn't say things she doesn't mean. No, Clara agreed. I didn't think she did. He looked at her across the table, with the direct, unhurried gaze that she had come to understand meant he was deciding how to say something rather than whether to say it. Clara, he said, there's something I need to tell you. That I should have told you before I left and didn't, because the timing wasn't right, and because I wasn't entirely sure I had the words for it. She waited. In Abilene, he said. I walked past the church on Main Street, the one Mary and I got married in. He looked at his hands. I used to not be able to do that. Walk past it. The first year after she died, I went 2 miles around it every time I was in Abilene just to not see it. He paused. This time I walked past it, and I thought about her, and it hurt the way it always hurts, but it didn't stop me. He looked up. I kept walking. And I thought about the ranch, and I thought about getting home, and the thing I was walking toward felt as real as the thing I was walking away from, for the first time. Clara looked at him. I'm not saying she's gone, he said. She'll never be gone. I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are, and I'm not replacing anything with anything. He held her gaze. I'm saying that I'm a man who came back from Abilene, and the first thing he wanted was to sit in this kitchen and see your face. And I thought you should know that because I meant what I said before I left. And I want you to know it wasn't just the auction and the day and the pressure of it. It's true when it's quiet, too. The kitchen was entirely still. Outside, Birch was explaining something to Holt, in the way Birch explained things at length and with emphasis. I know it is, Clara said. He looked at her. I know it's true when it's quiet, she said. I've known that for a while. I just didn't know if you were... She stopped, looked at her hands, looked back at him. I've spent my whole life being very careful not to want things I wasn't sure I was allowed to want, she said. It becomes a habit, a bad one. I know something about that, he said quietly. I think you do. She looked at him directly. I want to stay here, Nathan. Not because I have nowhere else to go. I have options now. Ruth Carey offered me a position at the millinery, and it was a genuine offer. I'm not without choices. She said it clearly, because she needed him to know it, needed herself to know it. I want to stay here, because this is where I want to be. Because you're the first person in my adult life who treated me like my value was self-evident and didn't need to be negotiated. She paused. Because when you come through that door in the afternoon, I feel like the house settles. Like something clicks into place. Nathan Cole looked at her across the kitchen table with an expression that was completely open. No reserve, no careful management. Just the plain face of a man hearing something true. Ruth Carey offered you a position, he said. She did. When? Tuesday. And you're still here Wednesday afternoon. I'm still here, Clara said. I was quiet for a moment. Then, with the directness that was his most consistent quality, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to take however long you need to answer it. She waited. Will you stay? He said. Not as my housekeeper, as more than that. As the person this ranch belongs to as much as it belongs to me. He held her gaze steadily. I'm not asking you to decide this minute. I know it's fast, and I know this town has made the cost of it real to you in ways that aren't fair. But I want to ask it honestly, and I want you to answer it honestly, and I don't want either of us pretending the question isn't there. Clara looked at him. She thought about every careful, hedged exit plan decision she had made in her adult life. She thought about her mother's limp. She thought about the road outside Red Valley and $43 and a promise to herself that she would not cry in front of people who hadn't earned it. She thought about a Friday afternoon cup of coffee and a man saying thank you the way people said things they really meant. Yes, she said. Just that. No qualification, no condition, no careful hedge. Just the word placed on the table between them, clear and whole. Nathan exhaled a slow, controlled breath that released something she understood had been held for a long time. All right, he said. She picked up her coffee cup. Lunch is cold. I'll heat it. Clara. She looked at him. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, briefly warmly, the touch of a man who did not perform affection, but meant it completely when it arrived. Then he let go and picked up his hat and said he needed to check on the cattle, and she went to the stove, and the afternoon continued with the practical, ordinary business of a working ranch. But something in the house was different. Not tense with almost and nearly, and not yet. Just different. Settled into itself in a new way, like a building that had found its foundation. The gossip reached them Thursday morning. Birch brought it in with the directness of someone who had learned by now that Clara preferred plain information to managed delivery. Mrs. Drummond is saying Mr. Cole came back from Abilene with a decision made, he said. She's saying it at the church and at the general store and at the millinery, though Ruth Carey apparently told her to take it elsewhere. What kind of decision? Nathan said. He was at the table with his coffee and his papers, not looking up. The marrying kind, Birch said. The kitchen was briefly very quiet. And what's the town saying about it? Clara asked with the composure of a woman who had made a decision and was not afraid of its consequences, only curious about their shape. Divided, Birch admitted. Mrs. Drummond's people are... He searched for a diplomatic word and gave up. Unpleasant about it. But Ruth Carey's people are saying it's about time. Nathan Cole had some happiness, and they don't see why it's anybody's business what the woman looks like. Ruth Carey's people, Nathan said. He did look up now. Turns out there's more of them than Mrs. Drummond thought, Birch said with some satisfaction. Holt from his chair said, always were. Nathan looked at Clara. Clara looked at Nathan. Something passed between them that didn't need words. Birch. Nathan said, go see about the water trough on the south end. It was low yesterday. Yes, sir. Birch stood. He paused at the door. He was visibly containing something. I just want to say for the record, I think it's real good. All of it. He looked at Clara. You're the best thing that's happened to this ranch since I've been here. I went out before she could respond, which was probably wise because she needed a moment. He means it, Nathan said. I know he does, Clara said. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not quite. Holt agrees, Nathan said. I know that too, she said. Holt refilled his coffee and went out to the porch without comment, which was, she had come to understand, his most eloquent form of agreement. Gerald Drummond came that afternoon. She had expected someone to come. She hadn't expected it to be Gerald himself without his wife, without the buffer of social courtesy. Just the man riding up to the gate in the early afternoon with the expression of someone who had made a decision about something and was committed to it. Nathan met him at the gate. Clara watched from the kitchen window, and she was not ashamed of watching, because this was about her as much as it was about anyone. She couldn't hear what Drummond said. She could see the shape of it, the particular posture of a man delivering an ultimatum, the forward lean, the hands that moved to emphasize points. She could see Nathan listening. She could see the moment Nathan responded because Drummond went still. She couldn't hear that either. But she saw Drummond's face change, the calculation receding, something more honest, replacing it. Not acceptance, not agreement, but the look of a man who had said the thing he came to say, and found on the other side of saying it that it hadn't produced the result he expected. Drummond looked once toward the house. Clara did not step back from the window. He looked back at Nathan. He said something else. Nathan nodded once. Drummond turned his horse and rode back toward town. Nathan stood at the gate for a moment. Then he came back to the house. "What did he say?" Clara asked from the kitchen. Nathan hung his hat on the peg. "He said he was washing his hands of it. That whatever happened from here was my problem, and he was done trying to help a man who didn't want it. And you said," I thanked him for his concern and told him I'd take it from here. Nathan looked at her. "He's not going to cause trouble anymore." "How do you know?" "Because Gerald Drummond doesn't fight battles he's already lost," Nathan said. "He's a practical man under all the bluster. He came to see if there was still a chance to change things. There isn't, and now he knows it." He paused. "He's also, I think somewhere under the rest of it, not an entirely bad man. Just one who's been comfortable long enough that he'd confused his comfort with what was right." Clara thought about that. "That's generous," she said. "Maybe?" He sat down. "Or maybe I'm feeling generous today." She set a cup of coffee in front of him. "Alcott is different," he said. "Alcott has money and patience and a score to settle now. He won't come to the house. He'll work around the edges." He looked at her. "I want you to know that going in. It won't be clean or fast." "I know," she said. "I've never had anything clean or fast in my life." She sat down across from him. "I'm not afraid of a man who works around the edges. I've been navigating those my whole life." Nathan looked at her with something in his face that she still didn't have one word for, that mixture of recognition and warmth, and the particular quality of a man who kept discovering that the woman across from him was stronger than even he'd estimated, and kept being glad of it. "No," he said. "I don't imagine you are." The second twist came on Friday. It came in the form of a letter, and it was not addressed to Nathan. It was addressed to Clara. The postwriter brought it at noon, and Clara took it to the back room and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at it for a moment before opening it, because the handwriting on the front was her aunt's, her mother's sister, a woman she had not heard from in 4 years since the funeral. She opened it. Her Aunt Helen was writing from St. Louis. She had heard through the particular mysterious channels by which family news traveled that Clara was in Red Valley working on a ranch. She was writing to offer Clara a position, a real one, a permanent one, in her dry goods store in St. Louis. Full wages. A room above the shop. Respectability was the word Helen used 3 times, which told Clara everything about the letter's underlying message, without any ambiguity. "You deserve better than a ranch hand's life," Helen wrote in the careful, meaning-well handwriting of a woman who believed she was helping. "You have always been too good for the frontier. Come to the city, where a woman like you can build something proper. I can offer you a real future, Clara. Don't let stubbornness keep you from taking it." Clara read the letter twice. She sat with it for a long moment. Then she went to find Nathan, who was at the fence on the east side, checking the repair Birch had done. She handed him the letter without explanation and waited while he read it. He read it once. He handed it back. "What do you want to do?" he said. "I want to know what you think," she said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. "I know." He waited. She folded the letter. "My aunt means well," she said. "She always has. She spent my whole life trying to rescue me from situations she thought were beneath me, and she's never once asked me what I thought was beneath me, and what I thought was exactly right." She tucked the letter into her pocket. "I'm not going to St. Louis." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She met his eyes. "Unless you're asking because you want me to consider it." "I'm asking because I want to know that the answer's yours," he said. "Not mine, not this ranch's, yours." She looked at him steadily. "I know the difference between a choice and a default," she said. "I've been making choices my whole life. This is one." He nodded. "I'll write her back tonight," Clara said. "And thank her. And tell her I've found what I was looking for." She said it simply without drama, the way you said things that were just true. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "Clara," he said, "I want to ask you something." She waited. "Not today," he said. "Not right now. There are things I need to settle first with the ranch, with the land, with—" He paused. "I want it to be right when I ask it. I want there not to be pressure from every direction when I ask it. I want it to just be about us for 1 minute, without the town and the land and the Alcotts and all the rest of it." He held her gaze. "Can you wait a little longer for me to do this right?" She looked at him. "Nathan," she said. "Yeah. I've been waiting my whole life to be asked the right question by the right person." She held his gaze without flinching. "I can wait a little longer." He looked at her with that open, certain face. "All right," he said. He went back to checking the fence. She went back to the house. She was smiling before she got through the door, and she didn't try to stop it, and there was no one in the kitchen to see it anyway, which meant she could let it be as big as it wanted to be. She put the letter on the kitchen table and sat down and wrote her response to Aunt Helen with the calm, clear handwriting of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted to say. "Dear Helen," she wrote, "thank you for thinking of me. I have found a position that suits me well and a place that I intend to stay. I hope the store continues to prosper. With love, Clara." She sealed it. She set it by the door for the next post rider. She went back to making dinner, and the evening came down over the ranch the way it always did, quietly, completely turning everything gold before it turned everything dark. And one by one, the men came in and sat down, and Holt nodded at his plate, and Birch talked about the fence repair with great enthusiasm, and Nathan sat at the head of the table and ate his dinner, and looked at Clara once briefly in the particular way he had of looking at her when there were other people present, and he wanted her to know something without saying it in front of them. She looked back. She knew. The Friday that week was different from every Friday before it. Nathan prepared the same way he always had: the good shirt, the careful wrapping in cloth, the afternoon ride toward town. Clara had the coffee ready. She always had the coffee ready. But this time, when he came back through the door with the flowers in his hand, he didn't go directly to the back room. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment. "Come with me," he said. Clara looked at him. "To town," he said. "To the cemetery." He held her gaze. "I'd like you to meet her." The words landed quietly, the way the most important things always did when Nathan Cole said them. She untied her apron. She took it off and folded it over the back of the chair. "All right," she said. They rode to town in the early afternoon side by side, Nathan with the flowers across his saddle, and Clara on Delia beside him, and the road curved up through the low hills, and the grass moved in the wind, and the sky was the blue that made you feel small in a way that had nothing to do with cruelty. The cemetery was on a little rise off the eastern road, just as Holt had said, and it was quiet in the way places where people came to be still were quiet, not empty, but purposeful. The silence of a place with a specific kind of work to do. Mary Cole's grave was simple. A stone, a name, the dates. Someone had planted clover around the base of it, which had survived, and the grass around it was green and tended. Nathan crouched down and laid the flowers against the stone with the careful, practiced tenderness of 3 years of Fridays, and he stayed there for a moment, still and quiet in that private way he had of carrying things. Then he stood. He looked at the stone. "Mary," he said quietly, conversationally, like a man resuming something. "This is Clara Whitfield. She came to the ranch in June, and she got the better of your garden." A pause. "She's the reason I walked past the church on Main Street this week." He was quiet a moment. "I thought you should know her." Clara stood beside him and looked at the stone and felt the full, complicated weight of the moment. The grief that was real, and the love that was real, and the new thing that was also real, all of it present at once, all of it allowed to be present at once. "It's good to meet you," Clara said to the stone simply. She meant it. Nathan stood beside her and said nothing else, and the wind moved through the cemetery grass, and somewhere above them a hawk made a long, slow circle. After a while he turned and looked at her. She looked back. "Ready," he said. "Yes," she said. They rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon light, And Clara felt something she could only describe as wholeness. Not the absence of difficulty or complication, or the grinding work ahead, with the Alcotts and the town, and everything still unsettled, but the wholeness of a person who knows where she stands, and who stands beside her, and has decided that is enough to build from. More than enough. When they got back, and Birch met them at the gate, with his customary enthusiasm, and Holt looked up from the fence with his customary nod, and the kitchen waited with its dried herbs and its curtains, and the second row of beans visible through the window. Clara stepped down from Delia, and stood in the yard, and breathed the evening air, and felt with complete certainty that she was home. Not the building, not the land, not even the people entirely, though it was all of those things too, the feeling of home that lived inside a person when they had stopped running from something and started moving towards something instead. She had been running a long time. She was done. September came in hard that year, not with cold. The heat held through the first 2 weeks, the kind that made the cattle restless and the water troughs drop faster than they should. It came in hard with work, the particular brutal density of late-season ranch labor that didn't ask whether you were ready and didn't care whether you were tired. Nathan was up before light every morning and back after dark most evenings, and the ranch ran with the focused, unsentimental efficiency of people who understood that the season had a closing date, and everything that didn't get done before it simply didn't get done. Clara ran the house the way she ran everything, without complaint and without waste. She had the meals ready when the men came in, the larder stocked for the season ahead, the garden harvested and the produce put up in the cellar, with the systematic thoroughness of a woman who took seriously the idea that a household was a living thing that required tending the same as anything else. She had written back to Aunt Helen. The letter had gone out and no response had come back, which she took to mean Helen was either composing something lengthy or composing herself. And either way, Clara was content to wait. What she was not content to wait for was Earl Alcott. Nathan had been right. Alcott was not a man who showed his hand at the front gate. He worked sideways the way certain kinds of trouble always did, through channels that were hard to trace and harder to confront directly. By the 3rd week of September, it became apparent that he had been making quiet use of his new position as the eastern neighbor to complicate the Cole Ranch's access to the road that ran along that boundary. Nothing illegal, nothing that could be addressed with a lawyer's letter. Just the steady application of inconvenience that a man with money and patience and a score to settle was uniquely positioned to apply. Holt brought it to the table on a Thursday morning, in the way Holt brought everything directly, without preamble, setting the information down like a tool. Alcott's fence crew moved his line 3 feet west yesterday, he said, onto our access road. Nathan set down his coffee. You sure? Measured it myself. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Clara watched him absorb it, the calculation moving behind his eyes, the assessment of what it meant and what it cost and what had to be done about it. I'll ride over and talk to his foreman, Nathan said. His foreman says he's following instructions, Holt said. I already asked. Another silence. Then I'll talk to Alcott himself, Nathan said. He won't be available, Clara said. Both men looked at her. He's building pressure, she said. Not solving a problem. A man building pressure doesn't make himself available for direct conversation. He makes you come to him, wait for him, chase him. It's designed to cost you time and dignity, and make you feel like you're always 2 steps behind. She paused. My father had a parishioner who operated the same way, used inconvenience like a weapon. Nathan looked at her steadily. What did your father do? He stopped chasing, she said. He documented everything, every infringement, every date, every measurement, and he filed a formal complaint with the county land office. Not because he thought it would move quickly, because it didn't, but because it created a record. And a man who relies on things being unspoken and unrecorded hates a record more than anything. Holt nodded slowly. The expression on his face was the closest thing she'd ever seen on him to approval. Nathan looked at the table. He looked at Clara. He said, Birch, get paper and a pencil and go back out with Holt and write down every measurement. Birch, who had been eating his breakfast with the wide-eyed attention of someone watching something important happen, put down his fork and went. Nathan looked at Clara across the now quieter table. "You've been thinking about this," he said. "I've been thinking about it since the auction," she said. "A man like Alcott doesn't stop because you ask him to. He stops when it costs him more than it costs you. And right now it costs me more." "Right now, yes." She met his eyes. "But a documented record changes the math, and patience changes it further." She paused. "He's betting you'll either fight him on his terms or give up. He's not accounting for the third option." "Which is outlasting him," she said. "This is your land, Nathan. You were born on it. He bought 40 acres of it 3 weeks ago. You know every inch of this county and everyone in it, and he does not." She said it clearly and without heat. "Don't fight the way he wants you to fight. Fight the way you know how to fight." The kitchen was quiet. Then Nathan said, "When did you get so good at this?" She picked up her coffee cup. "I've been navigating men who thought their money was the same thing as their rightness my whole life," she said. "I've had practice." Something crossed Nathan Cole's face that was fully, completely a smile, not the almost smile she'd been cataloging since June, but the real thing, direct and warm and present, and she felt it land in her chest, the way warm things landed after a long cold. "All right," he said. "We document everything." "Everything," she confirmed. He stood and put on his hat and went to help Birch, and Holt and Clara sat at the table for one more moment with her coffee and let herself feel quietly, privately satisfied. The record-keeping became its own kind of work, added to the existing work of the season, and Clara took it on with the same systematic care she brought to everything else. Every date, every measurement, every conversation with Alcott's foreman transcribed from Holt's memory and Birch's notes into a clean ledger that she kept on the kitchen shelf. It was on the 4th day of this that Ruth Carey came back. She came in the morning, which was different from her first visit, and she came with purpose rather than the careful, considered quality of someone who had thought hard about whether to come. She had barely sat down before she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it all the way through before you respond." "All right," Clara said. "Earl Alcott has been talking to people in town about the ranch," Ruth said. "Not about the land, about you and Nathan, about the nature of the arrangement." She folded her hands on the table. "He's implying things. Things that are designed to make Nathan look either foolish or immoral, depending on which version he's telling and who he's telling it to." Clara felt the familiar heat at the back of her neck. She kept her face still. "What kind of things?" "The kind that question your character," Ruth said directly. "He's not saying them himself. He's saying them through other people, through suggestion, through the way he raises an eyebrow when Nathan's name comes up. He's trying to make Nathan's judgment look compromised." She looked at Clara. "I want you to know because I think you deserve to know, and because I think the response to it matters." "What kind of response were you thinking?" Clara asked. Ruth looked at her for a moment. "I think the most effective answer to rumors about what happens in private is something very clear that happens in public." She paused. "I think Nathan Cole needs to make his intentions plain. To this town. In a way that doesn't leave room for implication." Clara looked at her coffee cup. "He said he was going to ask me something," she said quietly. "When things settled enough that it could just be about us." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "Things may not settle on their own," she said gently. "Sometimes you have to settle them yourself." Clara looked up. "I know," she said. She knew exactly what Ruth was saying. She knew exactly what it meant and what it would require, and what would happen if it worked, and what would happen if it didn't. She also knew, and this was the part that had changed, the part that was different from every version of herself that had come before, that she was not afraid of it. "Thank you, Ruth," she said. Ruth nodded. She stood. She put on her hat. At the door she turned and said, "He's a good man, Clara, and you're a good woman. Good people shouldn't have to hide in plain sight." She left. Clara sat at the table for exactly 2 minutes. Then she went to find Nathan. I was at the north fence with Holt, and she walked out there without her apron, which was enough of a departure from the ordinary that he looked up before she reached him. She said, "Can I talk to you?" Holt immediately discovered something urgent to attend to 30 yards away. Nathan came to the fence. He looked at her face, and whatever he saw in it made him still. "What happened?" "Ruth Carey came," she said. "Alcott is using us against you. Not the land us. Implications. The kind that are designed to look like concern and operate like poison." Nathan's jaw went tight. "I know you said you wanted to wait," Clara said. "I know you wanted it to be just us without the pressure and the town and all the rest of it." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking you to do anything you're not ready for. But I need you to know what's being said, and I need you to decide if waiting is still the right call." He was very still. "What are they saying about you?" he said. "The kind of things men say about women who live on a ranch with a man they're not married to," she said directly. "I've heard them before, about other women. I know what they mean, and I know what they're designed to do." Nathan looked at her with an expression that was beyond anger, quieter than anger and deeper than it. The expression of a man confronting the cost of something he should have moved on faster. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't apologize," she said. "Decide." He looked at her. She looked back. "I was going to do this right," he said. "I was going to get the land settled and get through the season and find a moment that was just Nathan." She said his name quietly but clearly. "There is no moment that the world is going to hand us that isn't complicated. That's not how this works. For us or for anybody." She paused. "You want to do it right. I understand that. But right doesn't have to mean perfect. It just has to mean honest." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Wait here." He walked to where Holt was performing his very convincing impression of a man who had been focused on fence work this entire time and hadn't heard a word. He said something to Holt quietly. Holt nodded. Nathan walked back to Clara. "Come with me," he said. "Where town?" he said. "I'm done waiting for a better moment." They rode into Red Valley at noon, which was as close to the worst possible time as a person could choose if they wanted to avoid an audience. The main street was at its busiest. The general store, the feed store, the millinery, the church steps, where people always seemed to congregate, regardless of whether services were scheduled. Nathan tied the horses in front of the general store and came to help Clara down with the same natural unhurried ease he always had, and she stepped down and stood beside him on the boardwalk. "Nathan," she said quietly, "what exactly are you planning?" "To be clear," he said. He took her hand. Not dramatically, not for performance. Just took her hand, the way a man took the hand of a woman he intended to keep beside him, and walked down the main street of Red Valley, Kansas, with her in the middle of a Wednesday noon, with everyone watching, like it was the most ordinary thing he had ever done. Clara felt the stares. Of course she felt them. She had been feeling stares in this town since June. But this was different. These were not the stares of assessment of a town deciding what she was and whether it approved. These were the stares of a town being told something clearly and publicly by a man who had never once in 11 years told them anything about his private life. They reached the general store. Gerald Drummond was outside it, which Clara suspected was not accidental. Drummond looked at Nathan. He looked at Clara's hand in Nathan's. He looked at Nathan again. "Gerald," Nathan said pleasantly. "Nathan," Drummond said. Something moved across his face, not hostility, something more complicated than that. "I'd appreciate it," Nathan said in the same conversational tone he used for everything. "If you passed something along when the opportunity came up. I intend to marry Clara Whitfield before winter, and anyone in this county who has something to say about that is welcome to say it to me directly, rather than through channels." He paused. "I won't be hard to find." Drummond was very still. Clara was very still. Nathan looked at her. His eyes were steady and direct and entirely certain. "I should have asked you properly," he said, quieter now for her. "I'm going to do that. Tonight. Correctly. But I wanted this part said where it could be heard." She looked at him. She thought about every road she had walked down with a suitcase, every door that closed. Every morning she had made herself get up and try again, because the alternative was a kind of dying she wasn't willing to do. She thought about a Friday afternoon and a cup of coffee and a man who said thank you, like he meant the whole world by it. You could have led with the asking, she said. He almost smiled. You would have said yes before I could get the words out. Probably, she agreed. Drummond made a sound that might in another man have been a laugh. He looked at Nathan. He looked at Clara. He looked like a man reassessing something he'd been certain about for a long time. You're a stubborn man, Nathan Cole, he said. I know it, Nathan said. Drummond looked at Clara. He looked at her directly for probably the first time since she'd walked into his ranch in June, and he'd dismissed her in 4 seconds. Whatever he was looking for in her face, he seemed to find something that surprised him. I owe you an apology, Miss Whitfield, he said. He said it stiffly, the way men said things that cost them something. But he said it. That first day, what I said was wrong. Clara looked at him. I appreciate that, she said, simply, without fanfare, because it was enough. Drummond nodded. He went inside. Ruth Carey was standing in the doorway of the millinery across the street. She caught Clara's eye. She smiled. Clara felt Nathan's hand steady and warm around hers. She held on. Joe. The word spread, because in Red Valley, the word always spread, and it spread with the particular speed of something people had been expecting and arguing about and waiting on. And by evening, it had gone from one end of the county to the other. The reaction, as Birch reported the next morning with barely contained delight, was split. Mrs. Drummond apparently had said, "Well, I never," with enough conviction to be heard through a closed door, which Birch seemed to consider some kind of achievement. Ruth Carey had told 3 separate people that it was about time, and she had said it in the tone that Ruth Carey used when she meant to be quoted. Earl Alcott had said nothing, which Nathan said meant he was recalculating, and recalculating men were less dangerous than men with a fixed plan. Holt, informed of the morning's events upon their return, had looked at Nathan and then at Clara and then at his coffee cup and said, "Good," and gone out to the fence. Later that evening, Clara found a small bunch of wild prairie clover on the kitchen table, not arranged, just placed there, the way Holt placed everything, and she stood looking at it for a long moment before she understood what it was. The old man had gone out and picked flowers. She put them in a cup of water on the window ledge and didn't mention it to anyone. Nathan asked her that evening. He came in after the work was done and washed up and put on his good shirt, which was not a Friday, and came to the kitchen where she was finishing the dinner dishes and stood in the doorway in the way he stood in doorways when he had something to say that required the weight of standing still. "Clara," he said. She turned around. I was holding something. Small and plain, a ring silver simple. The kind of thing a man bought from a jeweler in Abilene when he'd been thinking about it longer than he'd admitted to himself. "I had this in my pocket in Abilene," he said. She looked at him. "Before the auction," he said. "Before Drummond and Alcott and all of it. I bought it because I knew what I wanted, and I couldn't find a reason to keep waiting except that I was afraid of doing it wrong." He paused. "I've been carrying it since August." She put down the dish towel. "That's almost 2 months," she said. "I know. You carried a ring in your pocket for 2 months. I'm a careful man," he said. She looked at him. This steady, weathered, plain-spoken, careful man, with his bad timing and his good heart and his 2 months of silence, while a ring sat in his shirt pocket waiting for the right moment that the world was never going to hand them. "Ask me," she said. He looked at her directly. "Clara Whitfield," he said. "Will you marry me?" Not a speech, not ornamented, just the question, honest and plain and entirely his. "Yes," she said. He crossed the kitchen and put the ring on her finger, and she let him, and she looked at it on her hand, simple and silver and real, and felt something unlock in her chest that she hadn't known was locked until it opened. He kept her hand in both of his. "I want to say something," he said, "and I need you to hear it." She looked up. "You came to this county with $43 and a letter from a minister," he said. "You knocked on 3 doors, and 3 doors closed on you, and you kept walking. You showed up at my gate, and you didn't ask me for anything except the chance to do the work." He held her gaze. "You fixed my garden, and you fed my men, and you left coffee on the table every Friday before I told you why, and you never once treated me like a project or a cause or something broken that needed fixing." He paused. "You just showed up, every day, as yourself, And that was... He stopped. His voice was still even, but his eyes were not. That was more than I knew I needed. Clara held his gaze. You did the same for me, she said. The first day. When you didn't look at me the way everyone else did. She paused. I'd been looked at a certain way my whole life. You looked at me like I was just a person, like that was the whole thing. She felt the ring on her finger solid and warm. That was the whole thing, Nathan. He brought her hand up and pressed it briefly to his jaw. Not a dramatic gesture, just a real one. The gesture of a man who was grateful for something specific and wanted to say so in the only honest way he knew, and then he let her go and took his coffee cup off the peg and sat down at the table. Dinner smells good, he said. She laughed, the real laugh surprised and full, and went back to the stove. Earl Alcott made his final move 3 weeks later. They were at the county land office in town, Nathan and Clara, filing the documentation of the boundary infringements that Clara had been building since September. The county registrar, a small, precise man named Abbott, who had been in his position for 20 years and had seen most things, was reviewing the ledger with the focused attention of someone who appreciated thoroughness. Earl Alcott walked in. He stopped when he saw them. He calculated visibly the assessment of a man who had not expected this and was deciding in real time how to respond to it. He chose the direct approach. Cole, he said. What's this? Documentation, Nathan said pleasantly. Of the boundary adjustments your fence crew made in September. Dates, measurements, the foreman's statements. He nodded toward the ledger in Abbott's hands. Clara kept the records. Alcott looked at Clara for the first time with something approaching full attention. Not dismissal. Not the studied non-acknowledgement he'd used at the auction. Real attention. The attention of a man who was understanding something he'd underestimated. This is a legal matter, he said, shifting his tone. If there's a dispute about the boundary, there's no dispute, Abbott said mildly from behind the counter. He had been reading the letter with professional calm. These records are quite clear. I'll be sending a notice to your office about the corrective action required. He looked up over his glasses at Alcott. Within 30 days, Mr. Alcott. Alcott looked at Abbott. He looked at Nathan. He looked finally at Clara's hand, at the ring on her finger, and the calculation in his expression shifted into something that was not quite acceptance, but was at least acknowledgement. You've been planning this for a while, he said, to Clara, not to Nathan. Since September, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. She understood a man who respected competence even when it worked against him, possibly the only thing about him that was straightforwardly admirable. You'll have trouble from me yet, he said. Not a threat, almost matter of fact. Probably, she agreed. But you'll find it's more expensive than you expected. He looked at her. He looked at Nathan. He put on his hat and walked out. Abbott set down the ledger and said with the mild satisfaction of a man who had very much enjoyed the last 3 minutes. Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Cole. Miss, forgive me. Mrs. Cole. Soon, Nathan said. He glanced at Clara. Soon, she agreed. Abbott smiled. I'll have these filed by end of week. They walked out into the main street of Red Valley and stood on the boardwalk in the October light, and Clara felt the particular cleanness of a thing completed, not finished, because nothing was ever entirely finished, but resolved. Moved through. Put into the record where it would stay. He'll come back at us sideways, Nathan said. He will, she agreed. And we'll document it and file it and outlast him. She looked at him. That's the plan. That's the plan, he confirmed. He offered her his arm, which was a thing he had started doing since the day on the main street, simply and without self-consciousness, the way he did everything he meant. She took it. They walked back to the horses together, and the town went about its business around them, and some people looked, and some people nodded, and Ruth Carey, coming out of the millinery, said good morning, with the particular warmth of a woman who had placed a small bet on the right people and was glad to have won it. They married on the second Saturday of November. Not a large wedding, not a town event, though the town came anyway, because the town always came when it had decided in its slow and collective way that it approved of something and wanted to be present for it. About 30 people, which was more than Nathan had expected, and fewer than Clara had worried about. Holt stood at the front of the church in his best clothes, which appeared to be exactly the same as his ordinary clothes, but somehow different, and said nothing throughout the ceremony, except at the moment when the minister asked if anyone present had reason to object, at which point Holt looked at the assembled congregation with an expression that made 3 people shift uncomfortably in their seats, which was answer enough. Birch cried, which he denied afterward with great conviction. Ruth Carey sat in the 3rd row and looked like a woman whose faith in things had been confirmed, which was, Clara thought, exactly what she looked like. Thomas Cole had come from Abilene, Nathan's brother, a softer-faced version of Nathan with the same dark eyes and the same direct gaze, and a manner that was more apologetic than his brother's, but no less honest. He had arrived 2 days before, and spent those 2 days talking with Nathan in the way brothers talked when they had things to settle between them that had been waiting too long, and by the end of it, they had settled them. Thomas shook Clara's hand at the reception and said, "I'm glad he found you," and said it with enough sincerity that she believed him entirely. Gerald Drummond came to the wedding. His wife did not, which Clara had expected. Drummond sat at the back and left quietly after the ceremony, and on his way out, he stopped beside Clara and said, "You'll do well here," in a tone that managed to be both grudging and genuine at the same time, which she decided to take as the best version of him. Earl Alcott did not come. No one mentioned him. Nathan stood beside her through all of it, with the steady present certainty of a man who had made his choice completely and was not examining it anymore. When the minister said the words, Nathan looked at her the whole time, not at the minister, not at the room, at her, and she looked back, and the thing between them was so clear and so plain and so entirely without apology that she felt for probably the first time in her life that she was exactly the right size for the space she was in. Not too much, not something to be managed or accommodated or looked past. Exactly right. When it was done, and they walked out of the church together into the November air. Clara Cole, she turned the name over in her mind, simple and new, stopped on the top step, and looked out at Red Valley, laid out in front of her. The main street and the millinery and the feed store, and the ordinary beautiful hard-working machinery of a frontier town that had not exactly welcomed her, and had not entirely failed her either. And she felt something she didn't try to name, because some feelings were big enough to sit in without needing to be described. Nathan stopped beside her. "All right," he said. "Yes," she said. "More than." He nodded. "The cattle need checking tomorrow," he said. She laughed. "I know," she said. "The bread will be ready by the time you're back." He looked at her with that fully open expression that she understood now was his version of saying everything, the one he saved for moments that mattered, the one that meant she was seen completely and wanted completely, and none of it required negotiation. "That'll do," he said. She took his arm. They walked down the steps of the church together onto the main street of Red Valley, Kansas, in the November of 1885, into the ordinary, extraordinary life that waited for them, difficult and good and imperfect, and theirs built not on what the town had decided they deserved, but on what they had decided together on an honest road with a heavy suitcase and a steady man on a steady horse, and the particular stubborn grace of 2 people who had stopped being careful at exactly the right moment. Clara Whitfield had walked into Red Valley with $43 and a refusal to cry in front of people who hadn't earned it. She walked into the rest of her life with considerably more than that. She walked in with a man who had learned her value before she'd finished proving it. With a house that smelled of dried herbs and bread, and everything she'd built with her own hands. With a garden that would have sweet peas in the spring, because she had promised it, and Clara Cole kept her promises. With a town that was still learning slowly, imperfectly, in the way towns learned things that a person's worth had never been and would never be a matter of what they looked like on a dusty June morning with a suitcase in their hand. She had known that her entire life. Now Red Valley knew it too. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes and more often than people expected, that was exactly how things changed. Not through argument or force, or the dramatic confrontations that stories like to build toward, but through one person living the truth of themselves so consistently and so completely that the world around them ran out of room to say otherwise. Clara Cole had been doing that her whole life. She intended to keep doing it, for as long as she had.